Okay, well, we're back. I'm Al Blix. This is Art Lerner and Bruce Gibb, three organizational development consultants who are going to talk in this session about how to build and maintain client relationships. And one of the things that we know is that at some point in your engagement, you're going to have a primary client, a person who is either the leader of the organization or the person who's responsible for the particular initiative, and that person is the one you're going to end up being primarily connected with, even though you're working with other teams. So I'm going to ask you guys to talk about what's key in building that initial primary contact relationship.
Well, for me, after we got acquainted and we've decided we're going to work together and so forth, I always set up what I call the planning triangle. That includes me, brings the outside expertise, the executive on my client, and the internal person who's responsible for what I would be doing. So it would be HR, or it could be information systems, whatever. I don't want to leave them out because they're going to perceive me as replacing them.
Never thought of it in the triangle way, but almost no large company have I ever gone in without HR as part of it.
So that's the triangle,
Right.
and I call it the planning triangle, not triangle, the planning team. And it's important also to have a scheduled meeting with those, regular. And I would do that at least monthly if it's a real thing is really going fast. I do it more often. And then finally, after every meeting, we debrief. How did it go? What went well? What did not go well? What do we need to do different next time? What did we leave out that we need to add? So those two things are really critical in terms of structuring how you how you work with a client, maintain the relationships with them. At least that's a good place to start.
Well, I don't do it as formally as you just explained it, but that's about exactly what I do. I want to give you two examples. In one case, it wasn't where I talked with the main client, but it was somebody who could have thrown a whole monkey wrench in it. My first job at Ford was working with a math guy who basically invented OD, that all these guys knew. His name was Ronald Lippitt. And so when he sort of unleashed me on my own, and I was doing some pretty good work, there was one supervisor of a department, and we worked really well, and I had him included in things where he could even help other people who were struggling with making these changes. And when I came in then, the department head's assistant, who later became an OD consultant as a result of seeing how stuff was stash, said, John is on the warpath, he's bad-mouthing you. And so I found John at lunch, and to not go through all the issues, what happened was John then was about as old as I am now. And I had videotaped him running a meeting as a great example to show all the other people who were going to train to be coaches. And when he saw it, it wasn't the guy, this happens to a lot of us. He's used to looking at himself in the mirror and he still sees himself 30 years younger than he is. Okay? And he said, you embarrassed me, you made me a laughingstock because you just showed this thing of this old guy. I said, it's what we all see all the time. And then we went deeper into it. And I said, why did you get so heated about it and why wouldn't you talk about it with me? And this was relevant, is that it turns out that the culture at the time at Ford, it's changed radically since the 80s, is that it was a very command and control, not very little talk about emotions and what was going on. And so he didn't trust anybody that he thought had power, and that went on. At the other end, I was leading some really large-scale work for whole car vehicle programs, and I had done one for the Continental Mark 8. And then because of that, I was asked to do another one, and I did it for the Taurus. And this was a really large group, well over 100 people that were going to design the new model, even if they had the same name. And we take a break because it goes on all day, and we have lunch. And I always let the clients go first, so I'm standing at the back of the line. And this guy comes up behind me and he says, "You SOB." And And I turned, and it was a design manager in the major design center. And I said, what do I do now? He said, well, a lot of people weren't with the other car, but we don't have a lot of designers, so we were with the last car and we're with this car, and we know how you work. And then we saw when we started this, how the process didn't work well, and we were gonna talk about all the things that were supposed to happen that didn't happen, and then we just found out you fixed them all. And I said again, you need to remember, I didn't fix them. All I do is facilitate how this happens, and the guy who brought me in fixed them because I could have him see things that he wouldn't communicate with him. And that's a bridge that I get to play in organizations, and that's another way of building rapport.
Go ahead.
So I'm gonna change gears a little bit, talk about building relationship. At least the clients that I work with, they want in your proposal to see your plan of work. Step one, step two, they wanna know how are we gonna get, we've got these outcomes that we're gonna get to. And it's often very important to start like a steering committee or a larger team that kind of monitors that. And what you want to do is
Develops it.
right, it develops the plan and then monitors it.
Yeah.
And the whole idea is that you shouldn't own the plan,
Right.
right? That the client has to own the plan. And your ability to build that team, whether you call it a steering committee or leadership team, whatever it
Yeah.
is, 4 or 5 people, if it's the president of the company and his or her direct reports, then that could be one way to do it, or it could be a team that you put together just for a particular purpose. And staying in touch with that team, having them meet regularly, and seeing the roadmap that you're working towards, and knowing that you're gonna make changes in it. Monitoring, I've created very elaborate process roadmaps for the initiative, and we'd say, is this still the right way to do it? And the more you can get the client to own, not only understand, but own where we go next, the fact that you are the facilitator, they'll be threatened if you say, this is the way it ought to be done.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and
I'll just,
their roles in that plan
Yeah.
have to be clear.
yes,
What they do, what you do, and all of that.
And some of that, I just want to make a quick comment, because all of us have done really large-scale work with those hundreds of people in a room.
yeah,
There's a point at the early going of those things where we help them build that and realize it, because they are still looking to us to tell them what to do.
yes,
And we interrupt, we get them to talk back to the CEO, we get to, or at least question him, not,
yeah,
And we do things that were unimaginable to them by basically championing their boldness in saying what's on their mind about important issues.
And these are built on, these ideas are all consistent with an organization that's in the process of becoming more open, more democratic, more so forth. But an organization that's trying to become more structured, it doesn't have that, that's chaotic. The process may be a little bit different. I mean, I just keep that open as an open.
yeah, yeah.
If they're going through a tighter process, it still doesn't mean that the process that I'm using with them doesn't mean that they have to remain collegial. To just become austere because they need to get more organized is a regression in my mind. Maybe.
Well, yeah.
So ultimately, people support what they help to create. And if you want to have a good relationship with the client, you better make sure that you're not making yourself the client, as Arthur tells that story. Sometimes when it's more important to you that something happen in a certain way than it is to the client system, that's a good time to stop and say, wait a minute, who's the client here? Because you can't own the solution. You've got to help make sure, because you're going to leave at some point, and they're going to have to live with whatever gets
Yeah,
created.
and I have a beautiful example of that.
Give us the example.
I was working with a division of Ford, and they knew, this division, the head of the division knew they had to change the culture. So he invited me in, and he listened to what my thought about that, and he says, good, I want you to be head of it. I want you to change the culture. And I said, just a minute now. You are the culture, and unless we work through how you behave differently, this isn't gonna work. And so that was I would have loved to just taken it on and done it, right? No way, that wasn't.
No.
Right.
No, because, that, and I think this is an important thing to know. It's how did you guys come with it? I got into executive coaching almost entirely at the beginning, helping leaders manage how they needed to change in order for the project to work. Eventually, I got to separate executive coaching, and there wasn't necessarily a change initiative, but the question of, like, you know, we got to figure out how to change my people because they're just not behaving the way they
Right.
should. Getting the client to be okay with the fact that they're going to have to do things differently,
Yeah.
and for them to trust you enough to be able to see how that could happen.
We're not, I want to make, I know we're running short on time, but this rings a bell because you're all going to, in some fashion, do consulting. And there's a simple distinction, it's not the only one, but a simple distinction about the kinds of consultants out there is there are expert consultants, content. They know a subject really well. And then there are process consultants, meaning how do things go badly or poorly. You're going to choose what you're going to do. There are people who are famous in business consultants who are good at content. Look at any Harvard Business School professor. But, or most of them anyway. But we happen to be OD, we're not, and so OD is massively process oriented about if the relationships don't work, it's very rare when I can say, oh, I have good expertise in what you need to do. Sometimes that happens, I can help them a little. But usually I'm just there to help them, and even it may help them find a better consultant for that purpose.
Okay, so that's it. We'll be back in a few weeks for episode 3 of our little get-together.